Today we are going to look at the analysis of cycling. Cycling involves three joints: the hip, which is also known as the acetabulo-femoral joint, the knee, also referred to as the tibiofemoral joint, and lastly the ankle, known as the talocrural joint. As you can imagine, cycling places heavy emphasis on the muscles of the hip, quads, hamstrings, glutes, and calves, all involving these joints. There are four primary phases of movement that occur in a complete cycle, and each phase has a significant purpose in creating an efficient circular motion. The phases can be seen in this picture, but will be further broken down as we go along. While looking at this picture, we can see that the first phase, also referred to as 12 o'clock, is at the top of the circle. The second phase is on the right and is known as the power phase. The third phase, or 6 o'clock, is at the bottom of the circle, and last we have the recovery phase seen in the green zone. Now we will look at pictures that break down these phases so we can have a greater understanding of the lower extremity joints and muscles working throughout each one. This picture demonstrates phase 1 on the cycle, where the person expresses flexion at the hip and knee with slight plantar flexion at the ankle. Phase 1 occurs between 0 and 90 degrees of the motion. The primary muscle working concentrically to get the lower extremity to phase 2 is the gluteus maximus at the hip. At the knee, the rectus femoris aids concentrically in the extension, and at the ankle we have the gastrocnemius concentrically contracting in order to continue to plantar flex the foot. There are far more concentric and eccentric actions going on in phase 1, but we will look at them in the next picture as we see phases 2 and 3. This picture is showing the start of phase 2, also known as the power phase. Phase 2 occurs from 90 to 180 degrees and primarily involves the concentric contraction of the quad muscles as you drive downward on the pedal. During phase 2, many muscles are engaged because the most power of the entire cycle happens here and causes the hip and knee to become fully extended. Working concentrically at the acetabulofemoral joint, the gluteus maximus is still extending the hip, but also working concentrically are the knee extenders that include the rectus femoris, vastus medialis, vastus intermedius, and vastus lateralis. Lastly, the ankle plantar flexors are beginning to fully contract as we near the end of the second phase. Primary concentric action of the plantar flexors include the gastrocnemius soleus complex and tibialis posterior. Muscles that are eccentrically working during phase 2 include the hip and knee flexors, along with the dorsiflexors at the talocrural joint. Starting at the hip, the primary eccentric muscles include the rectus femoris, sartorius, biceps femoris, semimembranosus, semitendinosus, and the tibialis anterior. The cyclist in this picture has completed phase 2 and is at the start of phase 3, also known as 6 o'clock, because of the lower extremity being fully extended. A big shift in muscle action occurs following the third phase. After you reach full extension from the power phase, the backstroke action begins and the lower limb is starting to return to its initial starting phase. In order to get to phase 3 to 4, the hip and knee must flex while the ankle dorsiflexes. In this picture, we see the very beginning of the backstroke. Disregarding the cyclist's improper form, this picture provides a visual of what is happening between phases 3 and 4. Starting at the hip, the primary muscles concentrically working here are the rectus femoris and sartorius. Muscles working concentrically around the tibiofemoral joint include the biceps femoris, semimembranosus, and semitendinosus, as well as the gracilis. For the ankle joint, the tibialis anterior is concentrically contracting as the cyclist begins to show dorsiflexion. Eccentric action will be discussed in the next picture as we see a better visual of phase 3. The cyclist is now through phase 3 and beginning phase 4, which will bring them to their initial position. The same muscles discussed on the last slide are still concentrically contracting, while the gluteus maximus is eccentrically working at the hip. At the knee, the rectus femoris, vastus medialis, intermedius, and lateralis are eccentrically contracting, and lastly we have the gastroc soleus complex in an eccentric position to allow the dorsiflexion to occur. Now the cyclist has completed one full rotation of a 360-degree circle and will continue to repeat the process many times over. While the specific muscle action of a cycle will not vary much over time, there is still a lot of room for error and variance in the way someone rides their bike. You can see a very common error in this picture as the rider is abducting the knee. In this picture, the opposite is happening as the cyclist adducts the knee toward the bike. This is commonly seen during the power phase as the foot pronates, causing the tibia to internally rotate. This is not proper form and will cause inefficiency in the cycle by interfering with the sagittal plane movement. Other common mistakes seen in cyclists is the tendency to involve upper extremity movement. That is not ideal because the less upper body movement you have, the more oxygen available to be delivered to the lower extremity muscles and create a more efficient ride. Another point to take note is completing the full 360-degree motion when cycling. It is very common for one to stamp down during the power phase and do nothing until the next go-around. This is not proper form as you will want to emphasize the whole circle, especially to make sure you utilize the backstroke in phase 3 to prepare you for the beginning of the next circle. Besides proper form, it is important to have proper seating position on your bike in order to have the ability to perform the cycle properly. Oftentimes riders will have the seat too high, low, far back, or far forward. This measurement will vary for each individual.